The old soldier walked into the room with slow, heavy steps. His name was Commander Vexithera, and every young warrior in the academy knew his story. They knew about the scars that covered his dark green skin. They knew about the metal plates that replaced parts of his skull. Most of all, they knew he was one of the few who had fought humans and lived to tell about it. The room fell silent as he moved to the front. 100 young Korthak soldiers sat in perfect rows, therefore, arms folded across their chests in the traditional way. Their large black eyes watched him with curiosity and fear. They had heard whispers about the human wars. They had seen the files marked with red warning signs. But nobody talked about what really happened out there in the dark space where humans lived. Vexithera stopped at the front of the room and looked at each young face. These warriors thought they were ready for anything. They had trained for 10 years. They had learned to use every weapon in the Korthak army. They had studied the battles where their people conquered entire worlds in just a few days. They believed they were the strongest fighters in the galaxy. The commander knew better. "You think you know about war," he said in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. "You have read the reports. You have watched the training videos. You have practiced with your weapons until you can hit a target from a mile away. But today I will tell you about the enemy that makes our greatest generals wake up screaming in the middle of the night." One young soldier raised his hand. His name was Kexmore, and he was the best fighter in his class. "Sir, the humans are just a young species. They have only been in space for a few hundred years. How can they be dangerous to us? We have been fighting wars for thousands of years." Vexithera's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile, but there was no happiness in it. "That is exactly what I thought when I first heard about them. The humans live on a small blue planet near the edge of the galaxy. Their technology is simple compared to ours. Their ships are slow. Their weapons are basic. When High Command told us to conquer their colonies, we thought it would be easy work." The commander moved closer to the young soldiers. "I was a captain then, leading a strike force of 5,000 warriors. We had the best weapons, the fastest ships, the most advanced armor. Our target was a human mining colony called New Haven. The report said it had about 300 people living there, men, women, and children, who dug rocks out of the ground to make money." He paused, his dark eyes looking at something far away. The colony was on a planet with red soil and 2 small moons. It looked peaceful from space. Just a few buildings, some mining equipment, and fields where they grew food. We expected them to surrender as soon as they saw our ships. Most species do. They take one look at a Korthak battle fleet and decide that fighting is not worth dying for. Vexithera walked to the window and stared out at the training grounds where young soldiers practiced with their weapons. But when we sent the surrender message, something strange happened. Instead of fear or begging, we heard laughter. Not the crazy laughter of someone who had lost their mind. This was the sound of someone who thought we had just told a funny joke. The young soldiers looked at each other with confusion. They could not understand why anyone would laugh at a Korthak invasion force. The voice belonged to a human named Jake Martinez. The commander continued. He was not a soldier or a general. He was just a man who supervised the mining work. But when he spoke to us over the radio, his voice was calm and confident. He said something I will never forget. Vexithera turned back to face his audience. He said, "Thank you for the warning, but we are not interested in surrendering today. If you want this colony, you are welcome to come down and try to take it. We will be waiting for you." A young female soldier named Xerox spoke up. "Sir, surely you just destroyed them from space. Why waste time with ground combat?" The old commander's scars seemed to darken. "Because High Command wanted prisoners and information. They wanted to study human technology and learn about their other colonies. So they ordered us to take the settlement intact." He was quiet for a moment. "That decision cost us more lives than any battle in our history." Vexithera began to pace back and forth in front of the room. "We landed our forces in the early morning when the sun was just coming up. The plan was simple: surround the colony, demand surrender, and capture anyone who resisted. We had done this same thing on dozens of worlds. It always worked the same way." The commander stopped pacing and looked directly at his audience. "But the humans were not like any enemy we had fought before. When our troops moved in, the colony seemed almost empty. We could see people moving around, but they did not run or hide like we expected. They went about their normal work as if we were not even there. One of the young soldiers raised his hand. "Sir, were they too scared to react?" "No," Vexithara said simply. "They were getting ready to fight." While we were setting up our perimeter and checking our equipment, the humans were preparing the battlefield. But we did not understand what they were doing, because they did not fight the way we expected. The commander moved to a wall display and activated a holographic map. It showed the layout of New Haven Colony, a cluster of buildings surrounded by mining equipment and open ground. This is what we saw from our sensors: a simple settlement with no military defenses, no walls, no weapon platforms, no shield generators. We thought it would be the easiest conquest in Korthak history. He touched a control and the map changed. Red markers appeared throughout the area, showing the positions of the Korthak forces. We placed our troops here, here, and here. 5,000 soldiers surrounding 300 humans. Any military computer would calculate the odds as impossible for the defenders. Vexithara's voice dropped to almost a whisper. But the humans did not care about our calculations. They had something we did not expect and did not understand. They had Jake Martinez, a man who worked in mines and fixed machines. They had Lisa Thompson, a woman who designed the colony's systems. They had Bobby Chen, who drove the big trucks that carried ore. They had Amy Rodriguez, who managed the communications equipment. The young soldiers leaned forward, trying to understand what made these humans special. None of them were trained soldiers, the commander continued. But when faced with an impossible situation, they did something that no other species had ever done in our experience. They turned their entire world into a weapon designed specifically to kill Korthak warriors. Vexithara deactivated the hologram and faced his audience again. The first sign that something was wrong came when our advanced scouts started disappearing. Not killed in battle, just gone. One moment they were reporting their positions, and the next moment there was only silence. We sent search teams, but they found nothing. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no evidence that our soldiers had ever been there. The room was completely quiet now. Even the ventilation system seemed to have stopped making noise. Then the accidents started happening, the old soldier continued. Equipment malfunctioned. Weapons jammed at critical moments. Communication systems picked up strange signals. Our vehicles broke down in ways that should have been impossible. At first we thought it was just bad luck or faulty maintenance. Vexithara's scars seemed to glow in the dim light of the room. But Jake Martinez sent us another message on the second day. He thanked us for visiting his colony and asked if we were enjoying our stay. Then he said something that made our blood run cold. He told us that his people had been watching us since we landed. He knew our troop positions, our equipment types, even the names of our officers. And he had learned all of this without ever leaving his colony. The commander looked at each young face in the room. That was when we realized we were not fighting a battle. We were walking into a trap that had been designed by minds that thought in ways we could not understand. The humans were not trying to defeat us with superior weapons or greater numbers. They were hunting us with patience, intelligence, and a kind of creativity that turned everything around them into a tool for war. He paused, letting his words sink in. And that was only the beginning. Commander Vexithara watched the young soldiers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Good. They needed to understand what they might face out there in the dark spaces where humans lived. He had survived the nightmare of New Haven Colony, but barely. Too many good warriors had not come home from that cursed place. The second day started like any normal military operation, he continued, his voice carrying the weight of bitter memory. We had our perimeter established. Our sensors were working. Our communications were clear. High Command was pleased with our progress reports. Everything looked exactly like it should for a successful conquest. The old commander moved to the center of the room, his metal leg making soft clicking sounds on the floor. That leg had been replaced after New Haven. The original had been destroyed by something the humans called a mining charge, though it had been used in ways no mining manual ever described. Our first mistake was thinking we understood their leader, Jake Martinez, Vexithara explained. We had studied his background. He was 43 years old. married to a woman named Carol, father of 2 children. He had worked in mines since he was 18. No military training, no combat experience, no reason to be dangerous to trained Korthak warriors. One of the young soldiers raised her hand. "Sir, if he was just a miner, how did he become their commander?" "That is the wrong question," Vexithara replied. "The right question is, how did 300 civilians become the most effective fighting force we had ever encountered?" The answer lies in understanding what humans call leadership. The commander activated a new holographic display. This one showed the interior layout of the mining colony: buildings, tunnels, equipment yards, and processing facilities. Jake Martinez did not become their leader because he was the strongest or the smartest. He became their leader because every person in that colony trusted him with their lives. Vexithara pointed to different areas on the display. Martinez had worked with these people for years. He knew that Lisa Thompson could design anything they needed. He knew that Bobby Chen could drive any vehicle through any terrain. He knew that Amy Rodriguez could make their old communication equipment work in ways the manufacturers never intended. Most importantly, he knew that every person in New Haven colony would fight to protect their home and their families. The hologram zoomed in on the mining tunnels that ran beneath the settlement. But Martinez had something even more valuable than loyal people. He had Lisa Thompson, a woman who understood machines better than most Korthak engineers. Thompson had designed the colony's power systems, water systems, air recycling, waste processing, and emergency procedures. She knew every pipe, every wire, every structural support in the entire settlement. A young male soldier named Korvex spoke up. "Sir, surely our sensors could map all their systems." Vexithara's scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile. "Our sensors showed us what the systems were supposed to look like." Thompson had spent the night before our arrival rebuilding them into something completely different. She turned their mining equipment into weapons. She turned their power grid into a trap. She turned their water system into a delivery method for chemical weapons they made from cleaning supplies and industrial chemicals. The commander's voice grew quieter, forcing the young soldiers to lean forward to hear him. On the second morning, we discovered that our overnight camps had been visited by ghosts. Equipment had been moved. Supplies had been contaminated. Messages had been left written in perfect Korthak script, welcoming us to New Haven and hoping we would enjoy our stay. The room was completely silent. The idea of humans moving freely through Korthak military positions was almost impossible to believe. We increased our security. We posted more guards. We activated every sensor and detection system we had. But the visits continued. Every night, the humans would somehow slip past our defenses and leave us little gifts. Sometimes it was food that had been poisoned just enough to make us sick. Sometimes it was equipment that had been sabotaged to fail at the worst possible moment. Sometimes it was just a note telling us how many soldiers we had and where they were positioned. Vexithara walked to the window and stared out at the peaceful academy grounds. The psychological effect was devastating. Our warriors began to doubt their own senses. They would see movement in shadows where nothing existed. They would hear sounds that were not there. They would wake up convinced that someone had been watching them sleep. He turned back to face his audience. But the real terror began when we tried to approach the colony buildings. Bobby Chen had spent his career driving massive mining trucks through dangerous terrain. He understood ground pressure, weight distribution, and soil stability better than our own engineers. Chen had spent the night turning the approaches to New Haven into a maze of hidden traps. The holographic display changed to show the area around the colony. Red zones marked dangerous areas, but they seemed to be everywhere. The first trap was simple but effective, Vexithara continued. A section of ground that looked solid but had been undermined with mining equipment. When our heavy assault vehicles tried to cross it, they sank up to their turrets in loose soil and rock. The crews had to abandon their vehicles and continue on foot. A young soldier asked, "Could you not just go around the trapped areas?" "That was exactly what Chen wanted us to do," the commander replied. "Every detour led us into another trap. Areas that looked safe were actually killing grounds where the humans could attack us from hidden positions. Routes that seemed clear were actually channels that funneled us into ambush sites." Vexithara's voice took on a tone of grudging respect. But the most terrifying thing was how they used their mining charges. These were simple explosives designed to break rock for excavation. In the hands of humans fighting for their lives, they became precision weapons that could destroy our equipment, collapse our positions, or create barriers exactly where they needed them. The commander activated another display showing the timeline of the second day. At 800 hours, we lost our first assault team to a mining charge that had been placed under a bridge we needed to cross. At 10:30 hours, our communications array was destroyed by an explosive device that someone had somehow attached to our primary antenna. At 12:45 hours, our supply depot exploded when contaminated fuel ignited unexpectedly. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Each attack was perfectly timed and precisely targeted. The humans were not just fighting us, they were dismantling our entire operation piece by piece. The young soldiers looked at each other with growing unease. This was not the kind of warfare they had trained for. The worst part was that we never saw them, Vexthera continued. Our thermal imaging showed nothing. Our motion detectors remained silent. Our patrols found no tracks, no evidence, no sign that anyone had been in the areas where attacks occurred. It was as if the very ground had turned against us. The commander's scarred hands clenched into fists. At 1500 hours, we received another message from Jake Martinez. He thanked us for our patience and asked if we were ready to discuss terms for our withdrawal. Not surrender, withdrawal, as if we were the ones who were beaten. A young female soldier named Texavara raised her hand. Sir, what did your commanding officers say? Colonel Morthak ordered a full assault, Vexthera replied. He was convinced that the humans were just lucky, that their tricks would not work against a direct attack by overwhelming force. He sent 2,000 warriors straight at the colony buildings. The old commander's eyes grew distant. That was when we learned that Lisa Thompson had turned the entire settlement into a fortress that existed in dimensions we could not see. The buildings looked normal from the outside, but inside they had been connected by tunnels, reinforced with mining equipment, and equipped with firing positions that covered every approach. He activated a new display showing the colony from above. What we thought was a simple collection of civilian structures was actually an integrated defensive system. Every building supported every other building. Every room had multiple exits. Every corridor could be sealed off or flooded with dangerous gases. Every window and door was a potential firing position. Vexithara's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The assault lasted 6 hours. We lost 800 warriors and accomplished nothing. The humans defended their positions with weapons they had built from mining equipment and determination that defied all logic. They fought like every rock and every shadow was their ally. The commander looked at each young face in the room. But the most terrifying moment came at sunset, when Jake Martinez sent us a final message for the day. He said his people had enjoyed the exercise and looked forward to tomorrow's activities. Then he did something that haunts me still. Vexithera paused, his scarred face showing the strain of remembering. He listed the names of every Korthak warrior who had been killed or wounded that day. Not just their military designations, their actual names, their home colonies, their family connections, information that should have been impossible for him to obtain. The room was so quiet that the young soldiers could hear their own breathing. That was when we realized we were not fighting miners and farmers, the old commander concluded. The third day changed everything. Commander Vexithara could see in the young soldiers' eyes that they were beginning to understand the horror of what he had lived through, but they had no idea how much worse it would become. The humans were just getting started with their education of the Korthak military. When morning came on day 3, we discovered that our perimeter had been penetrated again. Vexithara continued, his voice steady but his hands shaking slightly. But this time the humans had left us something different. They had left us gifts. The commander activated a holographic display showing various pieces of Korthak military equipment, but something was wrong with all of them. Our weapons had been disassembled and put back together, not damaged or destroyed, improved. Someone had modified our plasma rifles to be more accurate. Someone had upgraded our communication devices to have better range. Someone had even repaired equipment that we thought was beyond fixing. A young soldier named Kexavara raised her hand. Sir, why would the enemy help us? Vexathara's scarred face showed something that might have been fear. Because they wanted us to know that they could do anything they wanted to our equipment. If they could improve our weapons, they could also make them explode in our hands. If they could fix our communicators, they could also make them broadcast our positions to their fighters. The message was clear. We had no secrets from them. No. Old Commander began pacing again, his metal leg clicking against the smooth floor. But the real psychological attack began when Amy Rodriguez started her broadcasts. She had been the colony's communications specialist, responsible for maintaining contact with supply ships and orbital stations. She knew how to use radio equipment better than most of our own technicians. He stopped pacing and looked directly at his audience. Rodriguez began broadcasting to our troops in perfect Korthak language. Not just the words, but the accent, the military terms, even the slang that soldiers use when they think no one important is listening. She spoke to us like she had grown up in our military academies. The display changed to show a transcript of one of Rodriguez's broadcasts. The young soldiers leaned forward to read it, their eyes widening as they processed the contents. She knew the names of our officers, Vexthara explained. She knew where we had served before New Haven. She knew about our families back home. She knew which soldiers were nervous, which ones were angry, which ones were starting to doubt the mission, and she used all of this information to break down our morale. A young male soldier named Vortek asked, "Sir, how could she know so much about us?" That question kept us awake at night, the commander replied. Our communication systems were encrypted with the best technology in the Korthak Empire. Our personnel files were classified at the highest levels. Our personal information should have been impossible for any human to access. Vexthara activated another display, this one showing the colony's communication array. It looked like standard civilian equipment, nothing that should have been capable of military intelligence gathering. But Lisa Thompson had modified their systems in ways we did not understand. She had turned their simple radio equipment into something that could intercept, decode, and analyze our most secure transmissions. The commander's voice grew quieter. Rodriguez would broadcast to us every evening at sunset. She would start by giving us the weather forecast for the next day. Then she would tell us about news from our home worlds. Then she would casually mention things like troop movements, supply schedules, and tactical plans that should have been known only to our senior officers. The young soldiers looked at each other nervously. The idea that an enemy could penetrate their most secure communications was terrifying, but the worst part of her broadcast was how friendly she sounded. Vexathara continued. She spoke to us like we were old friends. She asked about our health. She worried about whether we were eating well. She even gave us advice about how to stay safe during the fighting. It was like being psychologically attacked by someone's grandmother. The commander moved to the window and stared out at the training grounds where young warriors practiced with their weapons. The psychological pressure was enormous. Our soldiers began to question everything. If the humans knew so much about us, what else did they know? If they could penetrate our communications, what other capabilities did they have? If they could move through our positions undetected, were we ever really safe? He turned back to face the room. On the third night, we discovered just how far their intelligence gathering had gone. A human named Gary Thompson, Lisa's husband and the colony's maintenance supervisor, demonstrated capabilities that should have been impossible for any civilian. Vexathara activated a new display showing the colony's infrastructure systems. Gary Thompson was responsible for maintaining the power grid, water systems, waste processing, and environmental controls. He was essentially a glorified repair worker. But when faced with a Korthak invasion, he became something far more dangerous. The display zoomed in on the colony's power generation facility. Thompson had somehow tapped into our orbital reconnaissance satellites. He was using our own surveillance systems to monitor our troop movements, identify our weak points, and coordinate attacks against our positions. A young female soldier named Zexalin raised her hand. "Sir, how could a maintenance worker access military satellites?" "We never found out," Vexthara admitted. "Our technical specialists spent days trying to figure out how he had penetrated systems that required the highest level of military clearance. The best theory was that he had somehow reverse-engineered our communication protocols from captured equipment, but even that should have been impossible for someone without advanced training. The commander's scarred hands clenched into fists. Thompson used our own satellites to direct precision attacks against our supply lines. He knew exactly when our transport ships would arrive. He knew which routes our ground convoys would take. He knew where we stored our ammunition and equipment, and he used all of this information to make our own logistics network work against us. The display changed to show a series of attack locations marked in red. Supply convoys began disappearing without explanation. Equipment shipments were destroyed by explosive devices that detonated at exactly the right moment. Food deliveries were contaminated with chemicals that made our soldiers sick but did not kill them, keeping us weak and demoralized rather than creating martyrs. Vexithara's voice took on a tone of grudging respect. But Thompson's most brilliant attack was against our water purification systems. He somehow introduced a chemical compound that was completely harmless to humans but caused severe digestive problems for Korthak physiology. Our entire force was weakened without anyone understanding why. The young soldiers looked uncomfortable. The idea that their own supply systems could be turned against them was deeply disturbing. The fourth day brought us face to face with Bobby Chen's true capabilities. The commander continued. We had known he was a transport driver, responsible for moving heavy equipment around the mining operation. What we had not understood was that his years of experience had made him an expert in terrain analysis, vehicle modification, and tactical mobility. A new display showed the mining colony's vehicle fleet. The machines looked like standard industrial equipment, but something was different about all of them. Chen had spent the previous nights converting their mining vehicles into mobile weapons, platforms. Excavators became artillery pieces. Transport trucks became armored fighting vehicles. Even their small maintenance carts became reconnaissance platforms equipped with sensors and communication equipment. Vexthara's voice grew darker. But Chen's real talent was for ambush tactics. He would use the modified vehicles to strike our positions, cause maximum damage, and then disappear before we could respond. Our heavy weapons could not track targets that moved like his vehicles did. Our tactical computers could not predict the movement patterns of machines that defied all normal operational parameters. The commander activated a tactical display showing the fourth day's combat. Red markers showed Korthak positions. Blue markers showed human attacks. The pattern looked like chaos, but there was an underlying logic that was clearly visible. Chen's attacks were not random, Vexithara explained. Each strike was carefully planned to achieve maximum psychological impact while minimizing human casualties. He would hit our communication posts to disrupt our coordination. He would attack our medical stations to strain our resources. He would target our command positions to eliminate our leadership. The display zoomed in on specific attack locations. But the most terrifying aspect of Chen's tactics was how he seemed to predict our responses. Every time we moved to counter one of his attacks, we would find ourselves walking into another ambush. Every time we tried to pursue his vehicles, we would discover that the terrain had been prepared to trap our forces. A young soldier named Hexmore asked, "Sir, how many vehicles did the humans have?" 12, Vexthara replied simply. 12 civilian mining vehicles operated by one man who had never received military training. Against those 12 vehicles, we deployed 200 heavy combat units, 50 aircraft, and enough firepower to level a city, and we lost. Commander Vexithara stood silent for a long moment, his scarred face reflecting memories that still caused him pain. The young soldiers waited, knowing that the worst part of his story was yet to come. They could see it in his damaged eyes, in the way his metal fingers tapped nervously against his leg, in the slight tremor that ran through his voice when he spoke of the humans. The fifth day was when we stopped being an invasion force, he said finally. We became prey. The humans had spent 4 days studying us, learning our weaknesses, understanding our fears. Now they were ready to hunt us properly. The old commander activated a holographic display showing the battlefield on day 5. The Korthak positions looked scattered and defensive, completely different from the confident assault formation they had started with. By this time, we had lost so many soldiers that Colonel Morthak was forced to pull our forces back into a tight defensive perimeter. We were no longer trying to capture the colony. We were just trying to survive long enough for reinforcements to arrive. A young soldier named Kexatara raised her hand. "Sir, surely High Command sent help when they learned what was happening." Vexathara's damaged mouth twisted into something that might have been a bitter smile. "High Command thought we were exaggerating our reports. A mining colony with 300 civilians could not possibly defeat 5,000 Korthak warriors. They assumed we were either incompetent or lying. They told us to stop making excuses and finish the mission." The commander's voice grew harder. That morning, Jake Martinez requested a meeting. He said he wanted to discuss terms for our withdrawal. Colonel Morthak agreed, thinking it meant the humans were finally ready to surrender. Instead, it became the most terrifying hour of our entire military careers. The holographic display changed to show the meeting location, a small clearing between the colony and the Korthak positions. Martinez came alone, carrying what looked like a simple mining helmet. He was not armed, not armored, just a middle-aged human wearing work clothes and that helmet. But when he started talking, we realized we were face to face with something far more dangerous than any weapon. Vexathara paused, his compound eyes reflecting the memory of that encounter. The helmet belonged to Scout Leader Kexathon, one of our best reconnaissance specialists. Kexathon had vanished 3 days earlier while conducting a routine patrol. We had assumed he was dead, killed by human defenders or lost in an accident. The young soldiers leaned forward, sensing that something terrible was coming. Martinez placed the helmet on the ground between us and began to speak. The commander continued. He told us that Kexathon was alive and well, being treated as an honored guest by the colonists. He said the scout had been very helpful in explaining Korthak military procedures, equipment specifications, and tactical doctrines. A cold silence fell over the room. The idea of a Korthak warrior cooperating with humans was unthinkable. But that was not the worst part, Vexathara said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Martinez began reciting information that only our high command should have known. He knew our unit designations, our supply schedules, our reinforcement timelines. He knew the names of our officers' families back home. He knew classified details about other military operations happening in different star systems. The commander activated another display, this one showing a transcript of Martinez's words. The young soldiers read in growing horror as they saw their own military secrets laid out in simple human language. Martinez spoke to us in perfect military Korthak, using terms and phrases that are only taught in our most advanced academies, Vexathara explained. But he did not just know our language. He understood our culture, our psychology, our deepest fears and weaknesses. He spoke to us like he had spent years studying everything about our species. A young male soldier named Vorkesh asked, "Sir, how could one captured scout provide so much information?" "That was exactly what we asked," the commander replied. Martinez smiled and told us that Kexathon had been very eager to share his knowledge. Then he explained why our scout had been so cooperative, and that explanation changed everything we thought we knew about humans. Vexathara moved closer to his audience, his voice taking on an urgent tone. Martinez said that humans have something they call empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. He told us that his people had spent 3 days learning about Kexathon's life, his family, his dreams and fears. They had not tortured him or threatened him. They had simply talked to him like a friend. The young soldiers looked confused. This concept of making friends with an enemy was completely foreign to their military training. But the truly terrifying part was what Martinez said next, the commander continued. He told us that Kexathon had volunteered the information because the humans had convinced him that cooperation was better than conflict. They had somehow made our scout believe that fighting was pointless, that his duty was to help end the war rather than continue it. Vexathara activated a new display showing psychological profiles. Martinez explained that humans had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to work together, to convince others to join their groups, to turn enemies into allies. He said that conflict resolution was one of their primary survival skills. The old commander's scarred hands clenched into fists. Then Martinez made us an offer that defied all logic. He invited our entire force to surrender and join the colony as permanent residents. He said the humans would teach us their mining techniques, share their technology, help us build new lives far from the military conflicts that had consumed our careers. A young female soldier named Zexkara raised her hand. Sir, surely no Korthak warrior would accept such an offer. That was what we thought, Vexthara replied. But Martinez had done his research. He knew which of our soldiers were homesick, which ones were tired of fighting, which ones had families they wanted to see again. He spoke directly to each of our officers, addressing their personal concerns and offering solutions to problems they had never shared with anyone. The commander's voice grew darker. Martinez knew that Captain Yexithor's mate had recently died in an industrial accident. He offered Yexithor a chance to honor her memory by helping to build something peaceful, instead of destroying. He knew that Lieutenant Kexivor had children who barely remembered him because of his long deployments. He offered Kexivor a chance to raise his family in safety. The holographic display showed the faces of various Korthak officers, their expressions showing confusion and doubt. For the first time in our military careers, we were faced with an enemy who wanted to help us rather than defeat us. Martinez was not trying to kill us or capture us. He was trying to recruit us. Vexthara paused, letting his words sink in. The meeting lasted 1 hour. When it ended, 17 of our officers had requested permission to consider Martinez's offer. Colonel Morthak was forced to place them under arrest to prevent defection. The young soldiers stared in shock. The idea of Korthak officers wanting to defect to humans was beyond their comprehension. But Martinez was not finished with his demonstration, the commander continued. As he prepared to leave, he handed Colonel Morthak a datapad containing detailed intelligence reports about our own military operations, information that should have been impossible for humans to obtain. The display changed to show sample pages from the intelligence reports. The young soldiers could see classified Korthak military data presented in human language with human analysis and commentary. The report showed that humans had been monitoring our communications, tracking our movements and analyzing our tactics since the moment we entered their star system, Vexithara explained. But they had not used this information to destroy us. Instead, they had used it to understand us, to find ways to avoid unnecessary killing, to look for peaceful solutions to the conflict. The commander's voice took on a tone of reluctant admiration. Martinez told us that humans prefer not to kill their enemies if they can avoid it. He said that death was wasteful, that living opponents could be convinced to become allies, that even the worst conflicts could be resolved through communication and understanding. A young soldier named Hexvara asked, "Sir, if they did not want to kill us, why were they fighting so effectively?" "Because they wanted us to understand that resistance was futile," Vexthara replied. "Every attack, every ambush, every demonstration of their capabilities was designed to convince us that continued fighting would only lead to unnecessary casualties on both sides. They were not trying to defeat us militarily. They were trying to educate us politically." The old commander moved to the window and stared out at the training grounds. That evening, Amy Rodriguez made her final broadcast to our forces. She thanked us for our patience during what she called the orientation period. She said that the practical demonstrations were now complete and that serious negotiations could begin. He turned back to face his audience. Rodriguez told us that New Haven Colony was prepared to accept our surrender and integrate our forces into their community. She said that any Korthak warrior who wished to stay could find meaningful work in the mining operation, that families could be brought from our homeworlds, that children could grow up in peace rather than preparing for war. The reinforcement fleet arrived on the 10th day with 30,000 fresh Korthak warriors, 500 heavy assault vehicles, and enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Commander Vexithara remembered watching those ships descend from orbit, feeling hope for the first time since the nightmare began. Surely, he had thought, 30,000 soldiers could handle 300 human miners. He had never been more wrong about anything in his life. Admiral Korthvex commanded the reinforcement fleet, Vexthara told his young audience, his voice heavy with the weight of terrible memory. He was our most decorated officer, veteran of 40 successful campaigns, conqueror of entire civilizations. When he reviewed our situation reports, he declared that we had obviously been dealing with the colonists incorrectly. The old commander activated a holographic display showing the massive Korthak fleet in orbit above New Haven Colony. The ships looked powerful and intimidating, bristling with weapons that could level cities. Admiral Korthvex believed that overwhelming force was the solution to our problems. He planned to demonstrate proper military tactics by crushing the human resistance in a single decisive assault. A young soldier named Texakira raised her hand. "Sir, with 35,000 warriors total, surely the humans could not resist." Vexithara's scarred face showed something that might have been pity. "That was exactly what we thought, but Jake Martinez and his people had spent 10 days preparing for this moment. They had used our original invasion force as a learning experience, studying our capabilities, understanding our weaknesses, perfecting their tactics." The commander moved to the center of the room, his metal leg clicking against the floor. The morning of the assault, Martinez sent Admiral Korthvex a message that changed everything. He thanked the admiral for bringing so many new students to their advanced warfare seminar. He said the colonists were honored to have the opportunity to demonstrate their teaching methods to such a distinguished audience. The young soldiers looked at each other with confusion. The idea of humans referring to a Korthak invasion as a teaching seminar was beyond their understanding. Admiral Korthvex was furious, Vexthera continued. He ordered an immediate full-scale assault on the colony. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier was committed to wiping the humans from existence. It was supposed to be the most overwhelming display of military power in Korthak history. The holographic display changed to show the battle formation. Thousands of Korthak warriors advancing on the small colony in perfect coordination. The assault began at dawn with orbital bombardment of the surrounding area. Our plan was to destroy everything within 10 kilometers of the colony buildings, leaving the humans nowhere to hide. Vexithara's voice grew darker. But when the bombardment ended and the smoke cleared, we discovered that the colony was completely undamaged. Somehow the humans had protected their settlement with defensive systems that made our most advanced weapons useless. A young male soldier named Korthex asked, "Sir, how could mining equipment stop orbital bombardment?" "It was not the equipment," the commander replied. "It was the understanding." Lisa Thompson had spent 10 days studying our weapon signatures, analyzing our targeting systems, learning exactly how our orbital cannons worked. She had built countermeasures that turned our own firepower against us. The display showed a technical diagram of the human defensive system. It looked impossibly complex for something built by civilian miners. Thompson had created a network of reflecting surfaces that redirected our energy beams back into space. She had constructed absorption fields that captured our projectiles and converted them into power for the colony systems. She had even installed jamming devices that made our targeting computers aim at empty ground instead of actual targets. Vexithara paused, letting his words sink in. But the real shock came when our ground forces reached the colony perimeter. The humans were waiting for us, but not in the way we expected. The holographic display changed to show the colony as it appeared after 10 days of human preparation. The simple mining settlement had been transformed into something that defied military logic. The buildings were still there, but they were no longer just buildings. Thompson had connected them with tunnels that ran deep underground. She had reinforced them with materials that could withstand direct hits from our heaviest weapons. She had turned the entire colony into a single integrated fortress. The commander's voice took on a tone of reluctant admiration. But the most terrifying thing was how the humans had prepared the battlefield around their colony. Bobby Chen had spent 10 days reshaping the terrain, creating channels and barriers that forced our troops to move exactly where the defenders wanted them to go. A young female soldier named Zexelin raised her hand. "Sir, surely our forces could avoid obvious traps?" "That was the problem," Vexthera replied. "The traps were not obvious. Chen had made the safest-looking routes into killing grounds, and the most dangerous-looking areas into safe passages. Our tactical computers could not process terrain that had been deliberately designed to confuse military analysis. The display showed the battle from above, with red markers indicating Korthak casualties. The pattern looked like a systematic slaughter. Our first wave of 10,000 warriors was destroyed in less than an hour, not by superior firepower or overwhelming numbers, but by perfect coordination between humans who had turned their entire world into a weapon. Vexthera's voice grew quieter. Gary Thompson had spent 10 days expanding his surveillance network. He was now monitoring not just our communications, but our biometric data, our equipment status, even our emotional states. He knew which soldiers were nervous, which ones were confident, which ones were likely to make mistakes under pressure. The commander activated a new display showing intercepts of Korthak military communications. Thompson was feeding real-time intelligence to every human defender. They knew exactly where our forces were, what weapons they carried, what tactics they planned to use. It was like fighting an enemy that could read our minds. A young soldier named Hexmora asked, "Sir, how could 300 humans coordinate so perfectly against 35,000 warriors?" "Because they were not fighting 35,000 separate battles," Vexithera explained. "They were fighting one single battle that they had designed from the beginning. Every human knew exactly what every other human was doing. Every action was part of a larger plan that encompassed the entire battlefield." The old commander's scarred hands clenched into fists. Amy Rodriguez had spent 10 days perfecting her psychological warfare techniques. She was now broadcasting directly into our helmet communicators, speaking to individual soldiers by name, telling them about their families, their fears, their hopes for the future. The display showed transcripts of Rodriguez's broadcasts. The young soldiers read with growing horror as they saw intimate personal details about Korthak warriors being used against them in battle. Rodriguez would speak to our soldiers while they were under fire, offering them safe passage if they surrendered, promising them better treatment than they received from their own officers, telling them that their deaths would serve no purpose, except to satisfy the pride of commanders who saw them as expendable. Vexithera continued. The commander's voice took on an urgent tone. But the most devastating attack came from Jake Martinez himself. He had spent 10 days studying our command structure, understanding our military hierarchy, learning how to break our chain of command. The holographic display changed to show the Korthak command structure, with red lines indicating communications that had been compromised. Martinez began sending orders directly to our junior officers using Admiral Korthvex's personal command codes. These orders were perfectly formatted, properly authenticated, and completely logical from a tactical perspective. A young soldier asked, "Sir, what kind of orders?" "Orders that saved lives," Vexithara replied simply. Martinez would order tactical withdrawals from positions that were about to be attacked. He would redirect supply convoys away from ambush sites. He would cancel assaults that would have resulted in massive casualties, and every order was justified with intelligence that proved its necessity. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans had been using the Korthak command structure to protect Korthak soldiers from their own tactics. The battle lasted 3 days, the commander continued. By the end, we had lost 28,000 warriors. The humans had lost nobody. Not a single colonist had been killed or even seriously injured during the entire engagement. Vexthera's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. On the final day, Jake Martinez sent Admiral Korthvex a message that ended the war. He said that the practical demonstration of human defensive capabilities was now complete. He offered to discuss terms for a permanent peace treaty between humans and the Korthak Empire. The old commander moved to the window and stared out at the peaceful academy grounds. But the most terrifying part of Martinez's message was his final offer. He said that New Haven Colony would be happy to establish a training program for Korthak military officers who wanted to learn proper defensive tactics. He promised that human instructors could teach our forces how to protect their worlds more effectively.